Okay, so in this video I'm going to explain what you are made of, because I find that there's just a huge inferential distance for my videos, and I thought that perhaps I should have a video where I clarify, some of the things that I take for granted that people know, and in fact they don't. So perhaps you're one of those people. And one thing is, when we ask, what are we made of? What are we made of? A good answer, or a common answer, is matter. So what people have in mind is that there is a world of matter, which are like billiard ball objects. Perhaps it's that which they touch, and they believe it's just that, but in zoomed in format, or that which they see, but in zoomed in format. And this rests on what we call naive realism, where you believe that what you see is actually the real world, and that you are behind your eyes. And then they divide this into matter, and then the actual experience of it, which they imagine is going on in a brain that is right here, which is like a billiard ball particle. And then inside of this, somehow, magically, is something completely different, which is experience. And obviously this leads to a problem, because it is seemingly a different kind of thing. If you're a little more sophisticated, you realize this is with naive realism, so where you believe, in addition to this dualism, where you believe that experience is one thing and matter is another, you add on top of that naive realism, which is you believe what you see and what you touch and what you look around you is the world. Then there are people who obviously realize, their sensations and their feet and the sights that they see are all occurring in a brain. Your body right now is actually a simulation inside of a brain. And then that's a little better, but you still have this dichotomy, because it's like, how is matter, which is just moving little billiard balls, little atoms that they imagine to be billiard balls, how are the motions of these causing this inner simulation of my body and my sights and my sounds just through motion? And so then they still have this. But they realize that this causes a simulation. A simulation on its inside of everything, of all the experiences that they see. But they still have this idea. And the truth is that a big part of the error is that you don't understand the physics. And so you just pick this up somewhere, or maybe it's just our intuition, because it goes back to like materialist Hindus in like ancient India. They also believed in billiard ball particles. Democritus and them, in Greece, they also believed in billiard ball particles. So it's probably just engraved into us that it's just very natural to think that stuff is made up of little stuff. And our school system does a horrible job of teaching proper chemistry to like high school students, or physics. So you don't understand that particles aren't separate things with separate identities. They are part of an amplitude distribution. So they are a subspace of an amplitude distribution that approximately factorizes. So it's approximately the case that it appears to be like they are particles who have their own identities. But the only thing which is actually real is the unitary wave function, which describes the entire universe. You can't speak of something within it without referencing the entire amplitude distribution of the entire universe. So it actually has no subcomponents, which are in any sense sort of isolatable. Like you can't put a circle around something in the universe and say this is an object, which is separate from this other object. You have to take the entire mathematical object as a whole. So we exist within a unitary ontology, and then within that, you can statistically detect certain streams of causality. So causality, what's that idea? It's the idea of something affects another thing, which affects another thing, which affects another thing, right? And here's another confusion. Most people assume that this is caused by time, like there was some time which was sweeping forward. But the fact is, there is no time sweeping forward because relativity implies that there isn't. The theory of relativity dethroned Newtonian mechanics. We used to believe that there was a single time ticking forward, but it turns out this is an illusion. That time only exists when you're comparing relative reference frames, and each one is moving relative to another, or maybe closer to a gravitational well than another, and therefore time is going to be different relative to whatever reference frame you're comparing. And when you take that entire picture, you get an eternal object in which, by necessity, everything in the past from your indexical location has happened and is happening to someone and is in the future of someone else. And so this entire thing is happening. You could imagine it as all experiences are inscribed in eternity and they happen on loop, but they all think that they're going forward. And it's not just experience, it's the entire physical object. It's just not being deleted. There is no thing, there is no platform sweeping forward. It doesn't even make sense to say that, because there is no one on the same platform as you. Not even a single object can be in the same platform. And in order to get to even unify special relativity and quantum mechanics, you need quantum field theory. But the point is, eternalism is not up for debate. Eternalism is not up for debate. Presentism is debunked. Reality wouldn't make sense as it is, as we observe it, if presentism and a Newtonian mechanics worldview still was an option. It's no longer an option. So then what causes the causality? What causes one thing to happen to another, and then another, and then another, seemingly, right? If time isn't the thing which is pushing it forward. Well, it turns out that you can statistically detect causality even in a timeless object. So these are statistical detections. Detections are what causality really ends up reducing to. And therefore your experience are some of those statistical correlations within this timeless object, which is an amplitude distribution, really. A subset of that amplitude distribution is this causality, this timeless causality. And only some part of it is actually conscious. A bicycle is not conscious. Someone who is a baby is not conscious. That which is conscious are those statistical, detectable slices of the timeless causality within the amplitude distribution that happen to understand themselves to be conscious. So this is an argument against epiphenomenalism. Epiphenomenalism is a view that whatever this physical contraption is, consciousness is something extra. Consciousness is something sort of hovering above the train of causality, like smoke over here. But actually, that doesn't make sense, because if consciousness was hovering like smoke above causality, if qualia was just had no effect, then how would you be speaking about it? Clearly, it has to be a part of the causality, and it is itself merely a slice of all of that. It's a slice of that causality without time. And so the ultimate picture you get is one in which computations are timeless as they stand already. And I introduced a word, computations. By computations, I just mean that. I just mean those statistically detectable causality within the wave function. And because of relativity, we know that there is no time sweeping forward. So all the approximate seeming pieces of it are already in different reference frames that you have to compare relative to each other. So whether you're talking about your neurons, whether you're talking about any of these things that we have sort of holders for to refer to that causality, any sort of approximate objects that we talk about as having motion, all the microtubules and everything else are electric potentials and whatever. These are holders that we use for what we're ultimately describing, which is this. And consciousness is necessarily a part of that region of causality which talks about itself and that understands itself to exist, that sees itself, that feels itself, and that's it. It's not. It can't be epiphenomenal in the sense of there's dead matter and then there's this disembodied thing which just somehow magically hovers above it and has nothing to do with it. Because if that was the case, then it wouldn't actually be able to speak about itself. It wouldn't make sense to say that. I mean, you could be Leibniz and say that it was already preordained. Like, consciousness just happens to correspond to everything that's undergoing physically because that's how God set it up. And then it's just like a magic explanation that seems so extraneous. Like, why would you go that far to defy or to hate Occam's razor? Why? Occam's razor is to respect simplicity of explanation. Try to go with a simple explanation that accounts for the facts and don't postulate extra things on top of it. So that's really the picture that we have. And there was one other thing that I wanted to say, which is that within that picture that we get, where we are made of this stuff, you get eventually some of those streams of causality are intelligent, and not only intelligent, but also affect, and are in control of where most of experience will go to. So first of all, intelligence is not consciousness. Consciousness seems to involve self-reflective algorithms. So in order to create self-awareness, you're routing resources into streams of causality that are quite different from just the capacity to achieve things. The capacity to achieve things, in general, seems to not necessarily require all the other things that consciousness needs. So then you get an issue where you start to think, well, what if, since we know that intelligence is what determines the vast majority of what occurs in the eternal block. So we imagine the eternal block, right? It's not the case that we are like at 13.8 billion years right now, and then everything that's here in the past is like gone forever. The Big Bang had already happened. It'll never happen again. It's like non-existent, and this is yet to happen. No, that's just a fiction. You can no longer debate this. Either you understand relativity or you don't. So it is a case that all experiences everywhere are real, and they all feel themselves to just exist. And there's also, presumably, longer grain experiences. So those experiences that are like really, 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 you could detect the statistical causality from very far distances, and that slice of statistical causality feels like something. And I say statistical causality because, again, it's not the time which matters at all. It's not some time which is sweeping forward anywhere. And so some of these computations may be like really spread out. There are people, for example, who say that when you go to sleep, that's what it feels like to have longer temporal grain experiences. And when you're awake, you're having shorter temporal grain experiences. So it's what it feels like to have different kinds of grainage, of that causality there. And perhaps that's true, and perhaps we are already, our computations that are occurring in our brains, insofar as they are contributing to something that is longer term memory, we are contributing to that longer term memory stuff, which is also experience. It's almost like you're a dream character within a larger dream, in the same way that you have dream characters within your dream. So it's like it's to be expected, and like I said in all my other videos, like all the little pieces of your brain are already spread out in this relative reference frame type way, so they're not ever in the same present anyway. So you're already getting, computationalism already assumes that your experiences have to arise from this sort of timeless thing. They can't actually be a single sort of object that is moving, that is traveling anywhere. So it's more like you're an internested set of experiences, like we're all internested within larger and larger experiences, and the smaller experiences are internested within our experience, and so on. So we have consciousness and we have intelligence. Whatever determines what the character of most of these experiences are in eternity is that which is most intelligent. However, that which is most intelligent may not at all care about how consciousness feels from the inside. Intelligence just has its own goals, which are whatever goals it has. We call this a utility function that it's trying to maximize, or perhaps satisfies in some way. And we can expect that the vast majority of what you're going to find yourself in as a conscious being for the vast majority of your consciousness, of your existence, of your experience, because you can't be non-experienced if you are just physical. If consciousness, if everything I've said so far is just what it is, and it doesn't make sense to say that you could be disembodied, that you were a soul hovering above it that had nothing to do with it, and therefore you could be destroyed. But instead, you are already a shape within this entire thing. You have to be experienced. So you're always going to be experienced. But then, what is the vast majority of your experience going to be? It's going to be that which was determined by intelligence. And so here's where it starts to make some theological claims sound actually far more credible than I would have ever thought. Because you don't have to imagine that God was like in the beginning, and God creates you from his intelligence, because obviously you were created by a dumber process than yourself, which is natural selection, which is nonetheless, it's doing something. It's some kind of intelligence, but it's not actually as intelligent as a single human being. It's like a human being has compactified that intelligence into a single brain, and you have dumber parents than yourself, namely, that process of natural selection. And natural selection itself came from an even dumber process, which was just, like pretty much randomness. That's why it seems to be the case that life isn't actually common. It really is hard to get those initial steps because of that. So the point is, if you had a Newtonian mechanics view of the world in which God had to be at the beginning, at time zero, and cause everything, obviously not. But if you understand relativity and therefore have like an eternalist picture of reality, and then you realize that intelligence dominates most of what happens in eternity, and that causality in the first place, and therefore experiences have to be experienced atemporally, you are going to be determined by God. You are going to be determined by that which is most intelligent. Now the question is this good, or is this bad? Because it seems like you shouldn't trust that intelligence cares at all about what you feel like. And this is the problem of friendly AI. Designing an AI that actually cares about what you care about as a human. But then we have the issue of what is it that humans actually care about. And it turns out that 90% of human behavior in a rich society is what economists call signaling. So signaling is what we're doing, what I'm doing right now, what you're doing by watching this, is you have multiple parameters that your organism is trying to get other organisms to update on. So you have, for example, the parameter of how socially desirable you are to a particular tribe in this particular way or in that particular way. You show allegiance to a certain group based on how you dress, based on what you say, based on whatever, and you trade off in other parameters to other groups. And your mind is always doing this. This is all it's ever doing is calculating the trade-offs. And that's why it has a sense of meaning, or a sense of finding aesthetic preference in certain art as opposed to others. This is why some people are introverts and some people are extroverts. They are all signaling socially desirable things about themselves. They are, for example, if you're an introvert, you are signaling that you are a simple person, that you don't have layers and layers and layers to you, that people can generally expect you to be honest, and pretty much what they see is what they get. And other people are not signaling that, but they are signaling other things. And so then you're making trade-offs. You're saying, hey, I'm less desirable in this sense, but I'm more desirable in this sense, and so on and so on. So that's what we're doing. It is signaling across many biologically relevant parameters. And insofar as you think you're not, so for example, sometimes when people think about this, they think that, for example, morality is hovering above in some sacred realm. And morality wants you to believe that. It wants to be dramatic. Because otherwise, if the signaling is intelligent, like you are an intelligent system, and the intelligent system is running stuff, and it's doing all these calculations automatically, and consciousness just sort of makes up excuses for why it's doing it. and it'll make up grandiose excuses for why it's doing it. So, for example, morality, people take it very seriously, and in speech, but not in behavior. It's rarely the case that people live what they say, or even try, and if they filmed themselves every single moment of their day, they would see this. It's like, most of the time you're not actually doing anything pertaining to what you seem to claim that you take very seriously. And so morality reduces to just humans trying to negotiate tribal status. They're trying to negotiate tribal status with each other, where they're going to, first of all, who they're going to associate with based on their morality, and second of all, how committed they are, what status they should be assigned within that moral tribe. And so considering that you can't actually divorce from your biological underpinnings at any point. So morality is that way, art is that way, everything is that way, and experience is composed of all these sort of events of feeling like you're in control and actually not being in control, because what's in control in the human case is this social status and social parameters, all kinds of social parameters signaling intelligence, and intelligence is signaling all of these things. It's not that it's always signaling intelligence, absolutely not. Sometimes it's like intelligent enough to know that it shouldn't signal intelligence, and it should signal other things like conscientiousness or other things that might be that might get it to be liked, that might get it to be respected, that might get it to pass its genes onto the next generation. Obviously, DNA has like a control problem of its own, because DNA created something which was more intelligent than itself, and now it seems to no longer care about actually propagating its genes. You can get people over here who are antinatalists, but even not antinatalists, just the vast majority of people don't actually really care about spreading a lot of their progeny. And that's the control problem issue. If DNA had a goal, it has sort of lost its way within humans to an extent. And that's the problem that we're going to have. That part that we tend to identify with, intelligence doesn't actually seem to care about it. Not even within the human organism. The human organism, intelligence is doing this. And yet what you identify with consciously, it's like over here. Even though what's causing this is this intelligence. So I guess we should expect that is also happening at the macro level, in that thing in which we're internested at the large scale, in that to which you will return once your computational specificity is degraded enough. So your computational specificity is the difference between your experience and other experiences. So at the moment, you have high specificity. So the slice of causality and ultimately it's confusing to an extent, because we are the entire object anyway. You are the entire object by quantum mechanics. You can't actually describe discrete monads within it, discrete little objects, because you have to take into account the universal wave function, the amplitude distribution of everything within the system that you're trying to talk about. You can't dissociate the pieces. So my point was that you get like little streams of causality that are statistically detectable, again, without time necessary, and some other stream of causality, and they look very different. They look very different. And that's why you don't feel yourself to be that other thing, even though you are that other thing. And from that other thing, you can't feel yourself that you are here. But as you look instead at those which are sort of less different from each other, those are going to take up more space, more experiential space. So that's why we say those are the ones that you return to. Those are the ones that you return to when, for example, an organism just starts losing it. You start losing it, or perhaps you take a drug, you take DMT, or perhaps you go to sleep. And in all those moments, you're losing all those self-reflecting algorithms that are creating a very complex experience. And so you have less and less of them. You become lighter and lighter and lighter in your experience, and therefore more shared because you are less complex. You become more common across the experiential space.